Hello, and welcome to our third Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce at PDAC webinar, Mining the Future, Sustainability, Progress, and Inclusion in 2026. I'm Jamile Cruz, Vice Chair of the BCCC ESG and Sustainability Committee, Director of Joint Ventures and Brazil Country Manager for Rio Tinto. As we meet today, the mining industry enters 2026 at a critical point, where social environmental expectations, climate pressures, and geopolitical complexity are reshaping how companies operate and compete. ESG has become a core determinant of resilience and long-term value, driving mining companies to refine strategies under growing global scrutiny. At the same time, global mining activity is accelerating to meet soaring demand for critical minerals, with a growing market projection of trillions of dollars. These forces converge as the industry prepares for PDAC 2026, a global hub where more than 27,000 attendees will gather to discuss the future of mineral exploration, mining investment, technology, and sustainable development. But before we jump into this conversation, let me take a few minutes to thank our diamond sponsors, Arrow, Rio Tinto, Vale, our platinum sponsors, Alvarez & Marçal, Miller Thompson, and TMX Group, our gold sponsors, Anglo American, Aura, Brazilian Nickel, G Mining Ventures, Itafos, Melahawk Logistics, Arabi Gold, Wheaton Precious Metals, our silver sponsors, BMA Law, Brookfield, Steinweg Group, NVR, Wendel Holanda Scotia Wealth, and our partners, Agimbi and the Consulado Geral do Brasil in Toronto. We appreciate their continued support, as BCCC is an independent nonprofit organization that has promoted business relations between Brazil and Canada for over 50 years. At BCCC, we believe in the importance of the continued work and commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'd like to share with you the acknowledgement that this land where BCCC is located is part of the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huro-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwa Chippewa peoples, home of the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We're grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. Together, we stand as leaders, embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion. We recognize that D&I is not just the right thing to do, but essential for our organizational success. We lead the change, recognizing that diversity and inclusion practices must permeate every aspect of our businesses. By weaving D&I into the fabric of our organization, we cultivate an environment where every individual thrives and feels a sense of belonging, innovation flourishes, and collective potential is realized. Let us forge ahead, united in our mission to create a diverse and inclusive future that transcends boundaries and elevates us all. Without further ado, I would like to present Beatriz Pierre, Vice President, Health, Safety, Environment, and Community, HSEC, at Rio Tinto Aluminium and Lithium, to join me on this online stage for our discussion. Welcome to our webinar, Beatriz.
Thank you very much, Jamile. Thank you for having me. And maybe just to expand on what Jamile said, as she said, my name is Beatriz Pierre, currently working at Rio Tinto. I'm a chemical engineer by background who fell into mining, but I can say fell in love with mining. And I've been in the mining industry now since 2003, therefore many decades in this really wonderful industry that I have the pleasure to work in. Had the chance to and the opportunity, but I also say I have the honor, I want to say that to Jamile, to have worked internationally. I've had the chance to work in various countries in the world, including the US, including Chile, and New Caledonia, and of course also in Canada and a stint in the Philippines. And I think those are the things that have forged who I am today, and I'm very happy to be here. So thank you again, Jamile.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate having leaders like yourself to join us and discuss a little bit of the ESG in mining and everything that's coming ahead. Well, you just mentioned you've worked across vastly different cultural and operational environments. Maybe talk to us a little bit about your experience and which ones most shaped your leadership approach in the sector increasingly shaped by ESG expectations and this global geopolitical challenge that we're facing today?
That's a wonderful question. A hard one to answer in the sense that I think every jurisdiction I've had the privilege to work in has shown me three things that are really important. One is being humble, having humility, and understanding that everywhere we go will shape us in a way, will impact our lives, and we have the ability to impact others. The second one is deep listening, listening without paradigms, without thinking, oh, I do it differently elsewhere. Maybe it should be done this way here. I think that deep listening in a way where you can absorb the richness of what someone has to offer you is something that's beautiful. And then the third part that has impacted me in the way that I lead is the recognition that no matter where I've been in the world, humans love to be seen for who they are. They enjoy the fact that you see them as their specific competencies, their strengths, their weaknesses, but you recognize them as a whole. And I think those are the three things that have shaped my vision and my style of leadership is let's be humble wherever we go. Let's take the gifts that people give us by really enriching our lives, the way we think, because I believe that there is no one size fits all. I believe that the way you may lead in some parts of Canada cannot be the same way you lead in Chile. At the end of the day, the only thing that unites us is the way that I say human loves to be seen. They love to be recognized. They love to understand what they bring to the world. And that really has shaped my leadership style. And I've enjoyed every moment of it. And I think not only as a professional, but just as a woman, it's just made my life a lot richer.
That's amazing to hear. We talk a lot about cultural understanding or cultural recognition. I think a lot of what you shared just now, it's about a leadership style. It's about the future of leadership, to be honest, because I think when we recognize people, as you just mentioned, you get the best of those who are sitting at the table, right? It's about belonging and everything else. So I appreciate you sharing that. So maybe let's talk about ESG as a core strategy for business, right? We talk about ESG a lot, but I think I have two parts on this question. First, do you feel that ESG is now fully embedded and incorporated on the strategies for mining companies? And from your perspective, leading at HSEC, how does Rio Tinto has been translating this ambition of strong ESG performance into practical day-to-day operational decisions?
So I think to answer the first question, absolutely. And I've grown through mining, like I say, over the last 2 decades. And ESG has gone from being maybe a statement that we say and how we translate it into actions, and actions that are visible not only for short-term gains, medium-term, but long-term gains. I always say ESG is about legacy. So I really do feel within the mining industry that is something that is understood. The second part of the question was around Rio Tinto, and obviously I'd love to talk about that. What I do feel that we do very well is that we'll take ESG as a concept and translate it into actionable projects, items that actually will have an impact and drive changes in behaviors. And the beauty of that is that ESG is not a parallel agenda. It's not something that you do in addition to mining. It has to be embedded into your everyday decision making. So the way I see it at Rio, it's embedded, for example, with a new project. How do we assess risks? You're not going to do the project, and as the project is going on, then you start thinking about ESG. You have to think about it from the initial stages of a project, and that I've seen, and that I'm very proud of. I also say, for me, ESG, it can't be that it's in addition to production, addition to cost. It has to drive business decisions. It has to be in a way that for every leader within our industry, they have to see it as important as everything else that we do. And I think that's what I'm seeing is that how is ESG integrated into day-to-day decisions, how ESG has its own resource and capital allocation. You can't do things without those two things, right? So for me, the integration in ESG into our day-to-day habits, our way of thinking, our way of doing risk mitigation is how I think there is success within Rio Tinto with ESG. And it's really knowing that's an integral part And the only way to succeed is that there is synergy between our ESG concepts and everything else that we do in our day-to-day. So for sure, I've seen the mining industry really move ahead in that way, where things are embedded and you're not driving two parallel understandings of the world, and one being cost and safety and production, but that it's embedded into one very unified view of the world, that we can only succeed in mining if we do things right from the get-go. So yeah, that would be it for me with ESG. So very proud of the work I've seen in the mining industry over the last decades.
Yeah, and one of the things we used to discuss as a parallel to the strategies around diversity, equity, inclusion was always to bring people the concept of the health and safety culture, right? How if we think about health and safety in the past and how we evolved to be as we are today, where health and safety is kind of the starting point to everything we do, I think all these other topics that we see as an add-on at some point, it becomes embedded and it needs to become part of like essential part of the culture for us to be able to move forward and actually have a culture that respects those specific topics. So I think a lot of what you're saying, it's what we're seeing the industry recognize nowadays, the embedded ESG within the culture. It's really the movement towards acknowledgement of that as part of the essential part of our culture, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I one of the things that we talk a lot about, it's the use of land and how it, like being ecologically responsible or biodiversity responsible and respecting the environment for mining. There's this layer of cultural stewardship and how we're dealing with all of this that we're discussing nowadays. And while mining uses, based on the data that we access, only less than 0.1% of the global land, the operations usually are in areas where it's culturally and ecologically sensitive. How does Rio Tinto balance the demands of large-scale industrial operations with the need to protect sensitive ecosystems and cultural heritage?
So the first answer that I would have for that is the way that mining will intersect with sensitive environments. It's just acknowledging it, right? And I think that's the first step, is acknowledging that what we do will have an impact. But how do we do it responsibly? And this is where I think in Rio Tinto we do right up front with assessments, maybe just be land surveys, maybe cultural heritage surveys, but again, right from the get-go. And the beauty of the success is doing it in a way that we're having open and transparent conversations with the communities that surround us, with people who want to know how does this impact their life, their lifestyles, the way they live. And it's about being able to speak to it in a way that, takes away doubts, takes away paradigms, and shifts the way of thinking, of saying that, of course, it can be done responsibly. And it's not just because we have to. It's doing it because, again, I spoke about legacy in the last question, is doing it because it is the right thing to do. And it's also making sure that we're not taking decisions in isolation. There's communities that count on us. There's cultural sensitivities that, again, I spoke about listening and that humility of being able to understand what is important to someone else. Well, in this aspect, it is even more important, because cultural sensitivities is not something we decide as a mining company. It's something where we accompany with respect and with grace and allow people to tell us what is important to them, and respecting it. And I believe that's just really what has happened within Rio, is making it a pillar that is fundamental in how we make decisions. And we will think about the way mining has evolved into having discussions that lead to agreements. So there is no misunderstanding, there's no reading between the lines. It's this co-design of what our mines will look like, or the smelter footprint will look like, but having it done in a way that is very clearly laid out, where we have co-designed this together so that we can make decisions together. This is not about imposing views on one or the other of our stakeholders, but really that belief that we need to advance together in order to be successful. So that's the way I see it. I think it's this acknowledgement and doing it right from the beginning and just making sure we're co-creating, co-designing, and having respect for people's views and our stakeholders' views around cultural sensitivity and obviously around use of land, and doing it in a way that, leaves no stones unturned, just making sure we're having these open and transparent conversations.
Yeah, that's an amazing way of thinking about kind of the future, but maybe if you could share with us based on this first assessment, right? For those who don't know, Beatriz joined Rio Tinto in October 2025. Maybe from the visits that you had or even from your past experiences, are there examples you could share with us where this collaboration, cooperation, co-creation has been done successfully that we can showcase like how mining can do things differently?
Absolutely, there's examples. So I'll pick one that comes to mind. And obviously, maybe as we go through, I'd like to showcase so I don't leave anybody behind. But I'll take some of our examples. And for example, we have a facility called WIPA. And in WIPA, what we have is 11 traditional owners with whom we have agreements. And I think the importance of that example in WIPA is that each of our traditional owners have things to them that are needs, that are wants, that are must-haves. And it's how we actually look at everybody's needs and respond to that and not try to generalize and not try to say, this is a one-size-fits-all. I think that's a great example of that, of how that's being done. I also think, we always think sometimes of community aspects not as a science that we can define. But again, if I take some of our assets, we have actually scoped 16,000 hectares in 2025 to do our cultural heritage surveys, to make sure that there's every scarred tree that is there is being inspected and reviewed, and then that there are discussions with our traditional owners around that. That's just one of many examples, but I think that's one that's worth talking about. For example, just given the scope of what we do, and WIPA is a great example of how with multiple groups, such as 11 traditional owner groups, we find ways to work together and do things that will leave a positive legacy for us as a mining company, but also for everybody that lives around our operation.
Yeah, and I'm sure we can think of a few other examples, and in the future, maybe it's something that we can even work with your team to showcase those examples through the multiple external forums that we participate, because I think it's a question that I always receive from people when I'm traveling to Brazil or even discussing with family members, where it's like, show me some of the good things, right? Like I think we still are working very hard to change some of the image around the mining as a business. So I think some of those examples and us picturing, just like MRN is doing, right, with videos and something that's very accessible for everybody to understand their work is that's being done. I think it's quite important as well. But thanks for sharing that one. Okay, so biodiversity is one of the key topics that at least I've been related to since I'm responsible on the Rio Tinto scope for a mine that operates within the Amazon region. We understand that there is a recognition of healthy ecosystems and how they're critical for the long-term business success, right? Our business depends on the land. And we emphasize biodiversity mitigation, nature positive outcomes as part of the ESG approach. How are biodiversity and nature-based solutions being integrated into the strategic planning across the aluminum and lithium operations for Rio?
Excellent question. Again, I think just like the ESG is that biodiversity is not treated as a separate item. It's not a separate topic or subject. It is integrated in our governance structure, in our approvals for new projects, and on our existing projects. How are we working to preserve habitat? That is something that I think we do in many of our sites, and we do it very well. because we study these habitats and restore them, and in the cases also preserve them. And we have some great success stories where fauna has been able to reproduce and be very representative in areas that we've mined in, for example. And it's not just about fauna. I think there's great examples too with flora. You mentioned MRN, and I have so many great examples around MRN, but having met people who have discovered new types of orchids throughout the work that we've done, and how they've done that is by literally scoping and looking for things that maybe we wouldn't have looked at had we not been in this certain area. And to be able to see the joy when we discover a new species, and I think that's something that really elevated my thinking of, can mining also serve as education when we talk about biodiversity? May be discovering new flora, may be how we preserve fauna, but just these aspects have to be, again, really integrated into our planning. It cannot be something that we add on, as you said earlier. It has to be something that is seen seamless with everything else that allows us to do what we do. It's the basis of our license to operate. So again, very good examples of how we do that. But within Rio Tinto, we actually do recognize that healthy ecosystems is something that you think about at the beginning, during, and obviously post the legacy, because you want to have that resiliency in the ecosystems where you operate. So I think, again, over the long term, it's something that we understand that needs to be thought of right from the get-go.
Yeah, it's starting from a definition where this is definitely part of the strategy. It supports the growth towards something sustainable and a lot more productive from this perspective, for sure. Just for those listening who are not quite sure what we're talking about when we say MRN, MRN stands for Mineração Rio do Norte. It's one of the joint ventures we have on the aluminum business. So it's a bauxite mine that operates on the municipality of Oriximiná in Pará. And the mention that Beatriz just shared, it's a book around epiphytas or orchids that was issued or published during COP30 in Belém in November. I invite every single one of you to go to the MRN website and access the book. It's there. It's a beautiful book that showcases the discovery of these plants in the Amazon region, and it can showcase a little bit of this link of ecological restoration and the work that's done by the multiple professionals that work with us and along the way on not only mining but recovering the land to what it used to be when we found it. So it's a quite impressive book, and I recommend that everybody take a look at it. So maybe when we talk about the land, we use the term a lot now, a lot more now around social environment, right? We talk about the land, we talk about biodiversity, and one of the challenges I have is when people talk about biodiversity without really thinking about the community and the people who are also within that land. So community engagement, cultural heritage, human rights considerations are definitely central pillars to what we've been discussing and strategize and putting in our governance models for now and for the future. How do you measure our success, meaning Rio Tinto's success in community and indigenous partnerships today? And how has this evolved in terms of approach within the recent years?
Excellent question. So the way I see it is success would have two very important pillars, and obviously there is more, but the first one is trust. That is success. There has to be mutual trust between ourselves and our stakeholders, right? What we say we're going to do, we do. But in my career also, I'd have to say what I would also put as success is continuity. I've had like I say, the pleasure of working in multiple jurisdictions, and you will meet someone from the community or a stakeholder who said, but the last person who was in your role promised this, or we thought we were going to get that. And you're going, how is continuity dependent on the person who's at the helm versus continuity being dependent on doing the right things and having the proper agreements. So obviously, when I say trust and continuity, one way to bind it together is around having agreements. And I'm such a believer that agreements are important because they're tangible for both sides. They're tangible in what do we say we're going to do, but also tangible in how we receive what exactly is important to our stakeholder who's sitting across from us. So for me, it's not just about the agreements, but it's how we develop the relationship, but based on shared purpose. There's, again, for things to be successful, there has to be a united vision of what we want to do. And I think when we think about communities, it's how do we build resilience, but not based on a Rio Tinto definition. It's resilience based on the needs of the communities and how the community is then equipped to continue with whichever, may be new infrastructure, may be a donation for a school or a hospital, but how do we then equip the community to continue with this and to persist with whatever it is that's been given long after we're gone, right? So I think for me, that trust and continuity is something that I have seen in the mining industry and even in Rio evolve toward partnership models. And these partnership models isn't about they're only important while we're there. The partnership model is about building resilience so that whenever we're no longer there, how does that community continue to exist, continue to thrive? And I think it's just also being able to allow us to dream that anything that we can believe with our communities, with having the proper dialogue and the proper conversations, we'll actually get it done. So it can't be done in isolation. And I think that's what I've seen as the biggest evolution in mining is understanding that co-creation builds strength right from the get-go because you're building on a foundation where there is understanding of what the outcome is going to look like, and that based on good governance, right? It's not just one person sitting at the table making the decisions, but it's how we're actually making decisions together, what's important for our communities to thrive. I would say those are really important. So trust and continuity to me is definitely markers of success, and that being translated into agreements makes sure that we're communicating well and that we'll have the proper success, but in the long term as well, and not just while we exist as a mining company.
Yeah, I love the concept that we measure what we value or we value what we measure. So when you mention agreements, that's where my brain goes. Like if we define well upfront what's important, what's necessary, you can then measure along the way, define how the future needs to look like, and actually have a projection what the north is and continue to move that way. So I think the way you explain, and I think one of the movements that I've seen on the way we discuss the license to operate, right? If you take any of those annual issues from the consulting firms or others that says like the 10 top risks for mining, license to operate used to show up in a very specific way for a very long time. And I feel like at least the conversation we're having within Rio, we moved a lot from the license to operate being just like the legal license and really honest discussion about what the social license looks like. So I saw that Erica joined here on the past few projects that we discussed for Brazil. There's a lot of discussions around the social license, right? There is licensing and there's a process for us to get to a preliminary license, an installation license, an operational license, but there is a path that is, I think, parallel or even on top of that layer, which is how we communicated with the communities. And I think the latest standards really push us into doing a proper consultation and a conversation with the community where we define agreements that goes a lot more along the what you just explained versus our past views of community consultation and agreements, right?
Agreed.
Okay, so your role being one of the what I consider some of the biggest and challenge, like with more challenging roles within the mining business, has safety as part of it. And even though we talk about safety as core to our culture and it comes first, continues to be a challenge for mining, right? We do activities that are risky. So we know that Rio Tinto places health, safety, and well-being at the heart of its sustainability strategy, emphasizing a culture that respects people and aims towards zero harm. But what cultural and leadership shifts are required to sustain world-class safety performance across these diverse global operations that we perform?
Yeah, that one I need to take a deep breath before I answer because it's so close to my heart. And I'll start maybe with a personal anecdote. So, in my over 20 some years experience within the mining industry, obviously we hear the word safety. And I think it means the same to everybody in the sense of we want to ensure that people get to go home to their families, to their lives, and thrive and be safe. Um, but once in my career, I was actually, a witness to an incident that turned to be fatal. And, it was maybe 17 years into my career. And I think that obviously we know this and we feel it. And it's something that every leader and every person who works in the mining industry knows that safety is a core value. But when you live an experience where you know someone was within one of your sites and they came in that morning, must have said goodbye to their family members, and they came thinking they'll have a regular day and then they'll go back home, but you now know that this person didn't go back, is something that has forever changed my views of when we say safety is a priority. It's beyond that. It is a value. We have to make the decisions where life will always, always be valued over anything else. And I hear it a lot in Rio that it is a value, and I see it, and we're pushing that knowledge is something that needs to reside deep into the hearts of everybody, right? Because I've also in my career been an operator as much as I've been in vice president or president roles. And I remember as an operator, when you first start, your boss saying at plus 35 degrees, it's warm, it's humid. They say, put your glasses. And, I remember seeing some of my colleagues, they put their glasses on only when the boss was coming by. And it makes you think, are we putting our glasses on because the boss is coming by? Or are we putting our glasses on because we know that this can actually save our eyesight if something was to happen? And I think it's how we actually transition from these compliance models where people are doing things safely because someone is watching versus people are doing things safely because it is such a core belief that safety is as much as a responsibility of themselves as an individual and obviously as a company and as a leadership. And what I really have enjoyed in Rio Tinto is that safety is not only about the systems and the standards, right? Those are important. There needs to be policies, people need to be well trained, but safety is also about the person. How do we ensure the person has the right mindset to do what they do? How do we ensure the person has the proper training to do what they do? But more than anything is something I'm really proud of is how do we ensure the person has the voice to say, I don't feel safe doing what I'm doing? And that the person can use that courage to say, I cannot do this. This is an unsafe situation and work towards a solution with us. And I think for me, that is the biggest gift. So, what will allow us at Rio Tinto to thrive? My belief is making sure that every single person within our mining operations or smelting operations or refining operations or wherever they are, believe that safety is something that they can proactively change based on day-to-day decisions of this is safe or unsafe, a very continuous improvement mindset. What was good yesterday needs to always be challenged. Challenge the status quo. And I believe those things help. But the third one, and a global company like ours, is how we go from being a company that, does very well with their investigations when something happens, but to go from a learning and sharing company to a company that understands if it happens here and we find the root cause and we solve it, we eliminate the risk, that's the best way to look at it. And I believe that's what we're doing now with our critical risk management views and systems is let's go to the root cause. And the last part that I'm very proud of, but there's still some work, is around how we celebrate successes. In safety, when someone does something good, why reinvent the world? How do we share so that, something was done at one of our sites, maybe somewhere, for example, one of our sites in Brazil, and then we have the same technology in one of our sites here in Canada. How do we transfer that knowledge so that people can learn from others' mistakes, but also from others' successes? So that is something that I think will help us evolve towards an even safer culture. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about psychological safety. It's really close to my heart. We talk a lot about health and safety, physical safety, making sure people go back home safe. But, the world needs us to be open and transparent about mental health and how it impacts the day to day of people. And obviously, we're one individual. We come to work with all the baggage that we may have at home. We go home with all the baggage we've had at work. But how do we make sure we live our values of care, really taking the time to speak to the people that we work with and understanding how they're doing, how they're really doing, not just a superficial, hey, how are you? Good. Beyond that, it is essential that people feel empowered to speak up. And that's where curiosity, speak up when things aren't right, speak up when you feel you have a great idea. And, sometimes it breaks my heart. I hear people go, oh, I said this, a couple times. Speak up. You speaking up can change the fate of someone else. And I think as humans, when we come to work, we want to do the best that we can for us, for our families, but also for our colleagues. So again, psychological safety is something that also is part of our Rio Tinto portfolio when we think of safety. But, it is as important to me as physical safety, I'll call it. So, yeah, good question. Really passionate about this one. I could go on for hours, but obviously I know we have time. But yeah, that's how I would answer it.
No, that's very fair. And thank you for bringing psychological safety to the table. I think we are learning, right? As society, I think we're learning about what it means and how to help each other. So I think it's an important topic to always bring to the table. And hopefully we can set up one to just do a webinar or a bigger discussion just on psychological safety, because I think we're all benefit when we share what we've learned so far and the ways we're changing the industry and changing the ways we do things to protect people. So thanks for bringing that up. Okay, I will shift a little bit now to climate resilience and extreme weather preparedness. We do identify as an industry, we are seeing it, the increased impact from extreme weather, including tropical cyclones, wildfires. In Brazil, we have dealt with the dry out of the rivers, which are already affecting operations from Australia to Canada to Brazil. How are we building climate resilient operations, and what does resilience look like within the aluminium and lithium portfolio?
I love that question because climate is not a futurist, right? I remember when I was young, we talk about climate change as something that will come much later. It is present and we know it. And you've talked about extreme weather events, for example. So the way I see that building resilience is understanding how these extreme weather events affect us now and really doing certain things. For example, it may be infrastructure design. Rio Tinto has reviewed a lot of our infrastructure, making sure they are safe for cyclones or any other extreme events that we have. So, and that's talking about obviously new infrastructure we're building, but also existing infrastructure as, the norms have changed along the years, but making sure that we have that resilience with our infrastructure. And then, of course, in my portfolio, another part that's really important is business resilience. So let's say things do happen. How is the emergency preparedness? And again, as human beings, when there is adrenaline, how do people actually do when we're calm? So we test our business resilience. We do these desktop type of reviews just to see how people would react so that if something happens, that people at least have the right reflexes. So emergency preparedness is something that we take really seriously within Rio Tinto. Like I say, we do desktop exercises, but not only within the walls of Rio, if we know that it's going to impact the community, if something was to happen, they get involved. And not only as the community as well, we can involve others, some of the emergency responders as well get involved, because obviously we have certain chemicals on our sites. How would they react if that was to happen? So really that kind of, I'll call it the testing of our emergency preparedness is something that's another important pillar of how we're ready. And then the third part, I would say, is around proper planning, right? Because I think it's these things, again, where if something was to happen, we know cyclone season happens in certain periods. We know the rainy seasons are in certain period. Is just the preparedness of being ready and planning accordingly, planning certain things accordingly in terms of infrastructure, or building, or projects. And it's all these things that, that we're not caught by surprise, given the knowledge that we've had acquired around the extreme climate events that do happen around some of our sites. So really, I think the building resilience, if I really summarize it, it really is about infrastructure design, making sure what we have can resist. It's about how we as humans would actually behave if something was to happen by having the proper emergency preparedness. And the third pillar, as I said, is around planning, is making sure that if we know we're entering, for example, the wet season, how are we making sure some of our infrastructures are taken care of? And we've had projects, for example, where, wildfires are important. It's which kind of fauna do we actually plant around our facilities to ensure that, there isn't wildfire propagation at the same rate that there would be if other fauna was present. So again, it's something that's really thought of, and obviously the use of water as well, and how do we reduce that footprint is something that's integrated into our thinking. So yeah, that's how we'd answer that.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I think your last portion there already answered some of the questions we're receiving online. So Marcio Fonseca was asking, what are Rio Tinto's key initiatives to integrate nature-based solutions into its operations, particularly regarding ecosystem restoration, enhancing climate resilience in the regions where the company operates? So I think your example there of like, what do you plant, where the location of these restoration efforts are to support climate resilience. I think it's a great example. If you have anything else that you think of that you want to share with Marcio, please feel free. And for those listening in, we have a very good group of people here with us today. I think we have 60 plus. If you have additional questions or things that you want to comment, please put on the Q&A. I want to move into innovation because we talk about innovation, we think technology, but there's so many ways of innovating. And I learned that from a good friend, Lena Eagle, who talked to me a lot about innovation within the aspect of indigenous inclusion. I want to go into the human element of innovation. Why ESG and technology drive transformation, people remain the catalyst for new ideas, right? New ideas comes from people and from the concept of operational excellence, especially mining, where innovation needs to have the layer of safety, sustainability, and community impact. How do we empower people to be drivers of innovation, and what role are employees play in shaping the company's future sustainability and operational breakthroughs?
Great question again. Innovation, you're absolutely right. People are the true drivers. And not only they're the true drivers, they are the one in the seat, really, because the ideas have to come from people who are exposed to the job, to the risks, to what is happening. And again, I'm going to revert back to my first answer when you asked about learning and leadership, is when do we have the humility to listen and say, if someone has a great idea, even if maybe it's not articulated completely the way we would want it to be, but deeply listen to what the solution that they're putting on the table is. And sometimes maybe that person on their own, the idea is not complete, but with collaboration where you put multidisciplinary people around the table and you listen, you'll come up with a solution. And I think that's the beauty of innovation with people-centered belief that they are the driver, is that it actually makes us listen to people's ideas. And sometimes we always say, more, the better the idea, there's more people behind it. I truly believe that. and people who may think differently, people who come from different backgrounds within Rio Tinto, has different expertise, and just that ability to work together towards a common goal. So that's how I see it with technology. I really think technology has to be a lever to make things either safer, more efficient, or better. And that's what we're looking for. I talked about continuous improvement, but that's what we're looking for. And sometimes too, and that's something I really would like to make sure that all the teams understand, technology or innovation doesn't have to be this huge multi-million dollar idea. I've seen things as small as making sure that procedures are with a QR code so that people doesn't have to go back to a control room, try and find a dusty binder where they can look at their procedure, but it's right there. It's right in front of them. And I've seen things, for example, as autonomous driven mining trucks. So, of course, the scale of what can be used for technology is vast. But my belief is, even if it is small, there is no small idea because it is allowing us to improve and make things better. So, what to me is a strong example is maybe the way at Rio Tinto our values are stated. The first value that I will state will be curiosity. How can there be innovation if there's no curiosity? We have to want to challenge the status quo. We have to want to, ask questions and, don't, oh, well, it's been 30 years and we've been doing it this way for 30 years. We have to forget that belief. There's always a way to challenge ourselves to see if things can be better. And just having that courage also, which is one of our values, to say and talk about your ideas. Don't feel ashamed. There is no bad idea. I truly believe that. And to me, again, it leads into the care, right? The reason people want to make things better is because they care. And so I really think it's very well linked in Rio Tinto, this value where innovation is driven by people along and supported by our values. So again, super excited to see where that would lead us and really would love for, all the leaders and all the people listening here, how do we challenge the status quo? It keeps things fresh and that's where the new ideas get to live. And the last thing I'll say about that is share and copy, don't have to reinvent the wheel if it's possible.
That's a great comment to move into one of my questions, but also one of the questions we receive in the Q&A. So Pablo Herrera Joffre is asking if Rio Tinto has or participated or participates in initiatives where mining knowledge is systematically shared across our operations and sites, so teams can learn from both good practices and incidents, helping prevent recurrence and drive effective actions.
So to respond to that, oh, sorry, is that the end of the question? Yes, I can go ahead. To respond to that, yes, we have, the deep understanding that the way that we can be better is to make sure that not only do we share, but we learn. Because there's one thing about sharing. We can send out an email and go, this is what we have seen on a past incident or anything else. But how do we drive that share into something that's executable to drive learning? And that's really the journey that we're on now. Is it perfect? No, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. Is how do people take from what is shared and come out with it with this richness and this drive to change something at their own site? What breaks my heart is when we have an incident at one site and 6 months later, we have something very similar at another site. And when you look at the root causes, you just, it breaks my heart because you go, had we actually shared in a way that would have been executable, could we have avoided this incident? So yes, we do, but there's still more room to make it more useful, more systematic. But the seed is there where we need to be a sharing operation, but we also need to be a learning organization. And I think as part of our strategy, that's something that's there and really through collaboration for sure.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I do feel that that's the most frustrating and most painful moment. It's when we hear right after an incident that similar incident happened elsewhere, right? Meaning it could have been avoided. So I think we we will continue to work and have to continue to work on that sharing and learning across all sides and across industry, right? I think we, for sure, on the joint venture side, we share with our joint ventures the learnings from each one of the shareholders, but maybe more cross industry, there's ways of doing that. And then talking about the future of mining, cross industry collaboration, I would like to ask you about the Consolidated Mining Standard Initiative. You're part of it, Rio Tinto is part of it. For those who don't know, this aims to unify four major responsible mining standards: the Copper Mark, ICMM, Max TSM, and the World Gold Council's responsible gold mining principles into a single global framework. So, as a participant of CMSI, what impact do you believe a unified global mining standard will have on the future of mining, and how initiatives like this can drive consistency, transparency, hopefully all of this together across the industry?
The way I see it is the fact that it's unified can be very transformative. And why can it transform? Because it's not fragmented, right? You're not reading this standard to get this idea, and you're not reading this other standard. It's a unified view of what we need to do to be better as an industry. So already there, I think that unified look is something that's central to the success of CMSI. The second aspect for me of CMSI is the fact that it is multi-governance in terms of the model, right? So there's industry sitting at the table, there's representatives of our indigenous communities sitting at the table, there's civil society sitting at the table, there's labor representatives sitting at the table. And what a great mark of success in the mining industry when you can sit people from very different walks of life, but together in the industry to make something that represents them and they feel seen and represented within those standards. That's something also that multi-governance is really special to me, because it's something that we talked about co-creating. This is really co-creating, and that's why I'm really proud to be on the board for CMSI, is being able to hear people's issues and being able to have transparent conversations about them and build, standards that can reflect the various needs of people. And maybe the last part for me that's important within CMSI is, how can it drive performance? Is taking standards that maybe 3 years ago would have seen, or even 10 years ago would have been seen as something that we can achieve, but now knowing where the mining industry has grown and gotten better, making those just now the basics, right? So it's really following the evolution. What was, hard 10 years ago has now become something essential and we know how to achieve. Okay, it becomes a basic layer, and then we can build upon our past successes. I really like that, right? Because it moves the needle in the evolution of what the expectations are from ourselves as an industry, but from others also looking in. So really building on our successes and obviously still trying to fix things that are not perfect still, and making sure that those are highlighted so we as an industry work to continue to evolve and get better. So, that unified look of CMSI with that multi-governance to me are the keys to what will make it very successful and much less fragmented, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's great. I can wait. We've seen kind of the draft, so we're looking forward to the next step. Okay, so just to get close to the end here, we're ready, almost like only 5 minutes left. I just want to ask you, like you came to Brazil with me not too long ago, and the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce focus on strengthening bilateral innovation, natural resource development, and sustainability. Both countries, we know Canada and Brazil, are very well positioned to influence global energy transition supply chain based on our natural resources and how mining is involved in everything. Where do you see the strongest opportunities for Brazil-Canada collaboration, responsible mining, low carbon materials, and critical mineral development?
Well, let's start talking about my visit to Brazil and how inspired I felt. So I had the chance with a colleague and accompanied by yourself to visit MRN. And in those 3 days, I felt deeply inspired. So first of all, I want to start there with a team that understood the challenges of mining, but they were able to celebrate the successes and the day-to-day challenges and finding solutions that are creative to make sure that we improve daily. I was also shown the responsibility with which we are faced as a mining industry and how it's not just about mining, it's about making sure that the proper infrastructure, may it be schools, may it be hospitals, exist. And that was done in a way that really took my breath away. You know, it's just about the resilience of a community. And I had these moments where I got to meet people from the community, and I got to see the very tangible benefits of community outreaches that we've done or community donations that we've done. It's just the social impact, but in a way that was absolutely inspiring, where I got to see someone grow a multitude of vegetables and fruits, and I can't even grow a plant. So it was very exciting and just humbling also to see about how we can really live together and coexist in a way that is so positive and beautiful. So I guess I can't rave enough about MRN. So again, just that's my knowledge of Brazil. But where I see that we can even improve even more our relationship is, Canada and obviously Australia has had a very long history of developing agreements and co-creation with our stakeholders in our communities. I think, in Brazil is to continue on that journey, and where Canada can maybe help with the things that maybe in the past we haven't done so well, and how we've improved and what we still want to improve upon, and the co-designing of agreements. I think that's something that, Brazil would really benefit from, and or at the site that I've been really benefit from, because I talked about legacy. This is where you put pen to paper, you have this understanding of each party of what exactly is at stake. And I talked about continuity. That paper, regardless who is at the helm of a company, will continue. And so that's really where it would be. But again, I'm very, very proud to have seen the work that was done at MRN. And, if there's anybody from MRN on this webinar, good job. So that's it for that one.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We're getting very close to the end here. So first, I would like, on behalf of BCCC, to thank you and everybody who's participating here with us, our sponsors, partners, and members. And Beatriz, once again, this event, it's becoming our annual event, and we're very happy and proud to have leaders like you coming in and joining us and sharing your knowledge and experience. So on behalf of BCCC, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, and goodbye to everyone.
Thank you. And then for everybody who is listening, from February 28th to March 3rd, we'll hold the 20th edition of the Brazil-Canada Mining Conference during PDAC 2026 in Toronto, featuring exclusive events for members and sponsors. And please visit our website, register, and we'll see you next week. And thanks for being with us today. Cheers. Have a good one.